Regular viewers will be only too aware of my increasing interest in personal alchemy. That is the transformation of the self to become closer to one or uniting the self. This is because my personal journey through mysticism has taken me there. I'm convinced that our mission is to become closer to God. Even for atheists, you can substitute this for uniting with yourself. That is the reconciliation of all priorities. What has surprised me is that so much of what is seen as simply a simple magic, rather like the scriptures, appears to be pointing to personality traits or even Jungian archetypes. That is that our creation is shaped by psychology. For many scholars, this is the purpose of alchemy. However, at least as many scholars, if not more, disagree, seeing alchemy as simply giving rise to chemistry, even suggesting that this interpretation of alchemy comes from the New Age, invoking my hero Hermes Trismegistus to add a veneer of respectability to this view. Perhaps my way of reuniting this dichotomy is to argue that alchemy is both, and maybe you could say many other things. Certainly some medieval alchemist, Jabir al-Hayam, did pave the way for modern chemistry. Others do appear to focus on personal transformation. While some were obviously materialists, simply doing whatever would make them wealthy. And yes, often using subterfuge. In fact, this framework seems to fit all traditions of alchemy, the ancients. And in particular, I draw attention to the Hellenics, although you might want to go back to the Greeks, the Chinese, although I have to admit I know very little about Chinese alchemy. Islamic alchemists, despite Ibn al-Hayyan's very scientific approach, and the medieval Christian alchemists. Of course, personal alchemy is by its very nature occultist, but the level of impenetrability seems incomprehensible to the modern mind. A part of this impenetrability is the use of alchemical symbols. So this is my attempt to explain some of these symbols. All too often these are misunderstood and seen as sigils, or in Islam as representing jinn, especially when occurring in texts which are not obviously or explicitly alchemical. But then again, the preoccupation of so many in reading everything literally is really what is at fault and not the texts themselves. This is, of course, a long-winded way of saying that I will increasingly be focusing on alchemy in this channel. My listing of alchemical symbols is far from being exhaustive. There are many more, although many appear to be relatively modern. There also exist alternative versions. I've attempted to capture the main early symbols and their main versions. Where there are obvious interpretations, I have included these, but there will be many others. I'm here focusing on the symbols often used by the authors of alchemical texts as a shorthand, rather than the illustrations often by separate people, artists of their texts. And it's here that a further contention occurs, as the symbols may indeed refer to chemical compounds and processes, whereas the illustrations are all too often of a personal alchemical nature. I'll leave each image up for a little while should you wish to copy them, although of course you may need to pause the video. But in this vlog I don't propose to complicate things by adding a lot of commentary. I will, however, provide much more explanation in subsequent vlogs. first collection of symbols comes from what Paracelsus described as the three primes, the Tria Prima. We then move to the elementals, or the four classical elements. And it's these four elements that are said to combine to produce the Philosopher's Stone. Now, I'm not going to go into explanations on this because I've already done a vlog on it, but I will return to it later in other vlogs. And now, before moving to the seven Ptolemaic planets and their corresponding metals, I introduced the rather obvious symbol for a star. Indeed, of course, at that time the planets were known as stars. It's these planets and their corresponding metals which are the most subject to change and alteration over the years. Not least as in the late medieval period, new metals were beginning to be discovered. And of course the Ptolemaic cosmos was beginning to be questioned. I mean, it's been questioned for a long time, but it was gathering momentum, shall we say, by this time. This leads to the next section of mundane or lesser elements, reflecting the discovery of new metals and indeed substances. In fact, I recall, as an O-level chemistry student, bottles being labelled with these alchemical names. Fascinated sort of 14-year-old me. I mean, I simply assumed them to be Latin. I had no idea they were connected to their alchemical names. Despite my introduction to O-level chemistry having been started, as I guess everybody's was, describing how alchemy gave way to modern chemistry. And now to the compounds produced by the chemical process itself. Now, the alchemical magnum opus was sometimes expressed as a series of chemical operations. And as there were 12 signs, each could be assigned a sign of the zodiac. So these are the sort of modern day chemical processes, if you like. These operations are augmented by units, to which I've added some additional symbols, simply because they seem to fit in, but I have to admit I am uncertain of their origin. As I say, I will be returning to these symbols and their esoteric meanings in subsequent vlogs. But all I wanted to achieve in this vlog was to acquaint you with the symbols themselves.